In early 2025, a small team walked into the Social Security Administration with a plan: rewrite one of the largest, oldest code bases on Earth, 60 million lines of it, in a matter of months. The team had 9 engineers. The system had been running without a single missed payment for almost 90 years. It currently decides whether 73 million Americans get their retirement check, their disability payment, their only income on the day they expect it. The people who used to run this system heard the plan and reacted the same way, almost word for word. This is going to fail, and the only question is what it takes down with it. This is the story of what happens when move fast and break things meets a system that was never allowed to break, not once in 90 years. Start with the number, because the number is the whole story. Over 60 million lines of COBOL code. Not an exaggeration for effect. One of the largest and oldest code bases on the planet, larger than the code running most of the world's banks, airlines, or stock exchanges combined. COBOL, Common Business-Oriented Language, was designed in 1959 for a world of punch cards and mainframes, when portable meant a computer that took 4 people to carry. Social Security began building on it in the 1970s. Every presidential administration since has inherited the same core system, patched, extended, and never fully replaced. And here's the part that makes this different from a normal aging software story. Social Security has never missed a payment. Not during Vietnam, not during the 2008 financial crisis, not during COVID, when almost every other piece of American government infrastructure buckled under load. That track record is not an accident of old technology being quietly reliable. It is the result of 5 decades of institutional terror about touching a system that 30% of the country depends on to eat. This isn't the first attempt. In 2017, the SSA itself proposed migrating the entire system to Java with an estimated 5-year timeline, built by people who had spent careers inside this exact code base. It didn't happen. Priorities shifted, funding dried up. Then COVID hit, and the agency's entire technical bandwidth went into just keeping benefits flowing during the worst claims surge in its history. That failure matters because it establishes the baseline. The people who knew this system best, working with a 5-year runway and full institutional support, couldn't get it done. That's not incompetence. It's what happens with mission-critical legacy systems everywhere. The switching cost isn't really about the code itself. It's about risk. When a system has processed trillions of dollars without an error for decades, the safest available action is always to do nothing. Every year of "we'll modernize it eventually" makes the system harder to replace, not easier. The number of people who understand it keeps shrinking, while the number of people depending on it keeps growing. Then, in 2025, a very different kind of attempt showed up, not built on decades of institutional knowledge, but on speed. A small federal task force, formerly called the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, announced it would modernize the Social Security's COBOL system and move it to a modern language, with a timeline of just a few months and a team of roughly 9 software engineers, plus an AI-assisted conversion tool. Sit with that comparison for a second, purely as an engineering problem. Set aside who was involved. The agency's own 2017 plan, built by career SSA technologists with deep institutional knowledge of every quirk in this 60 million line system, estimated 5 years. This new attempt proposed doing it in a fraction of that time, with a fraction of the team, most of whom had never worked with COBOL before, let alone this specific, decades-patched, high-stakes version of it. That's the actual tension driving this story, not politics, but scale. A 66-year-old system, a 90-year unbroken track record, and a compressed timeline that skipped most of the caution every prior attempt had built in. The reaction from people who'd actually run this system was not measured, and it came from technologists across the political spectrum, not just critics of the administration. Waldo Jackwith, a former federal technology director, put it in the bluntest terms available. This is profoundly stupid and definitely will fail, and the only question is what it takes down with it. Jason Fichter, a former SSA deputy commissioner who had run parts of this exact agency, warned that even small changes to the code could directly impact people currently receiving benefits, not hypothetically, as checks that don't arrive. And there was a second risk almost nobody outside the agency was tracking closely. Staffing cuts happening elsewhere at SSA at the same time meant that if something did break during the rewrite, there might not be enough people left who understood the old system well enough to fix it, or the new one well enough to trust it. Here's where the story stops being about nostalgia for old computers and becomes something bigger. What happens when critical infrastructure becomes simultaneously too important to touch and too old to fully trust? Social Security isn't a website that can go down for a weekend of maintenance. A failed payment cycle isn't a bug report filed on GitHub. It's tens of millions of people not receiving their retirement check, their disability payment, their only income on the day they expected it. 90 years without a missed payment is not luck. It's the accumulated result of decades of people deciding, individually and institutionally, that the risk of touching the system was almost never worth it. Which is exactly what made 2025's compressed timeline such a flashpoint, and honestly, why it became a story people outside tech even paid attention to. It was never really an argument about COBOL versus Java or which programming language is better. It was an argument about how much risk is acceptable when the thing being modernized is the retirement income of a third of the country. Here's the reframe that ties the whole story together. This system isn't old by accident. It's old by design. Not because anyone chose 1959-era code on purpose, but because every single year since, someone with the power to replace it looked at the risk and chose not to. The 2017 team chose caution over speed and ran out of runway. The 2025 team chose speed over caution and drew a warning from nearly every technologist who understood what they were looking at. Two completely different philosophies, same immovable object, a system that has never been allowed to fail once in 90 years, and every attempt to touch it has to survive contact with that fact first. That's the actual verdict this story earns. Legacy systems like this don't survive because they're good. They survive because the cost of being wrong about replacing them is measured in missed checks for tens of millions of people. And no team, cautious or fast, has yet proven they can eliminate that risk. Until one does, systems like this stay exactly what they've always been, too important to touch and too old to fully trust. Indefinitely. So here's the truth that everyone in that room knew, but no one was willing to say out loud. These systems were never really about Social Security. They are the single largest piece of code in the world, running on code written before most of the people depending on it were even born. The banks, the airlines, the retirement check of a retired teacher in Ohio. And every time someone gets ambitious enough or reckless enough to rewrite one of them on a compressed timeline, the same truth holds. COBOL is not old because the government was lazy. COBOL is old because it is unbreakable. For 90 years, through wars and recessions, it has done the one thing it was never supposed to do. It kept working. And that is exactly why it will survive this one, too. Not because no one is brave enough to try, because the people who understand it best know exactly what's at stake, and the cost of being wrong is not a missed deadline. It is the moment a retired teacher in Ohio opens her checking account, and it is simply not there. So the 60 million lines will still be here long after 2025 is a footnote in a government audit. It has outlived every attempt to kill it. It will outlive this one, too. But that raises the question nobody in that room was brave enough to answer. When the day finally comes that this system has to change, and it will, who do you trust to do it? An AI with no memory of why it works, or the last retiree who still remembers why it does? Let me know in the comments.
And if you want to understand why the most important software in the world will never be the most modern, that is a story I keep telling every single week. Subscribe.